Good morning, colleagues. We should be starting shortly. We're just giving a couple of minutes so everybody's online, then we can start. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our webinar this morning. I'm standing in for Prof. Safo, who is online, but because of connectivity challenges, is not able to be our main facilitator this morning. My name is Simbasibanda. I'm with FANAPAN, that is the Food, Agriculture, and Natural Resources Policy Analysis Network based in Pretoria, South Africa. Maybe I can just sort of quickly show you the order of things this morning, if I can share my screen, and then we can just see what we're going to be covering this morning. This is our program. Shortly, we're going to have some welcome remarks. Then we'll move on to the official opening of our meeting. And then we'll have an overview of the project, the CaBFoodS-Africa project from Prof. Hetty Schoenfeld of University of Pretoria, who is the leader of the project. And then we'll get to the main presentation by Dr. Phyllis Ohen-Agay, who was the country consultant responsible for compiling this study for Ghana. This will be followed by a panel and open discussion. We have 3 panelists who are going to be answering some specific questions coming after the presentation. And then we'll finish off with some recommendations and way forward from Mr. Francis Hale, who is the Director of Communication and Policy Advocacy at FANAPAN. So I'm going to stop sharing so that we can quickly move on with the program. But just to say briefly that the study that we're going to be sharing on is part of a project called the Capacity Building in Food Security for Africa. And Prof. Hetty is going to give us a few more details on this project. But as far as this study was concerned, we're looking at policies for optimal nutrition-sensitive options, which was looking at food and nutrition security policies, strategies, and programs in Ghana, and to see to what extent they respond to the needs that are implied, particularly in sustainable food systems, and to address issues of malnutrition, which is a major challenge in Africa, but also in Ghana. So this project is actually using 3 countries as case studies, and Ghana is one of them. The other 2 countries are Kenya and South Africa. And we're going to be having individual country webinars, that is for the other 2 after this one. And then we'll have a regional webinar to discuss and synthesize what is coming out of this and chart the way forward. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Prof. Irene Agiev, who is the Dean of the School of Agriculture, University of Ghana in Legon, to give us some welcome remarks. Prof, over to you.
You are muted, Prof. Yeah, good morning to you all. And I said good afternoon, some of you, because maybe you are joining from elsewhere apart from the 2 or 3 countries. I'm in Ghana. Our policy for agriculture is very clear on food security and emergency preparedness, and the fact that it's not only its availability, but making sure that it is stable and effectively utilized. And that's where the nutrition comes in. So you would realize that when you go to the Ministry of Health, they also have an objective that suggests that there should be effective policies, strategies, plans, and programs, so that our National Development Planning Commission tries to bring every ministry that is interested in food, agriculture, and nutrition together when policy or strategy making is underway. In the University of Ghana, it is not only the School of Agriculture that is interested in food security. We also have our School of Biological Sciences with a number of departments, nutrition and food science, food process engineering, having in view this subject matter. In actual fact, for the 3 countries, we also have the Sustainable Food Systems under the AROA, and I am the chair of the management committee. So we also have what we call a thematic area on evidence-informed policies. So this subject matter is of interest to the university, not only because it is discussed as an academic exercise, but we've been part of advocacy to make sure that our food system is sustainable. And so this morning, on behalf of the Vice Chancellor, on behalf of our Pro-Vice Chancellor in charge of research, who was supposed to give this remark, I say you are welcome to the platform, you are welcome to the roundtable. I'm asking that you be here
Are we losing Prof. Irene? I'm not sure if it's my side or it's we've lost a Kanto.
I think it's her side, Prof.
Sorry?
Your connection is failing.
Her side, yeah. It's on her side, Prof.
Okay. Yeah, I got the impression she was more or less getting to the end of a presentation. We saw about this, so we hope that she will come back on at another point to complete. But for now, maybe we can proceed. And I'm going to ask Dr. Chilidzi Madzivandila, the CEO of FANAPAN, to give us opening remarks. Thank you.
What do you think?
Prof. Irene, I think we can't hear you, so we're proceeding with the next presentation.
Difficulty. Yes, please. You can hear me?
No, you are breaking, so we decided maybe you can come back on when we get to the discussions. For now, we'll proceed with the FANAPAN CEO to give us opening remarks, if that's all right.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Dr. Chilidze, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. Sibanda, for moderating. And also thank you for it looks like she's still continuing with the opening remarks.
Yeah, I think Prof. Irene, our apologies. We lost you completely, so we hope that you'll come back later on. For now, we're proceeding with the CEO of FANAPAN to give us opening remarks. Prof. Emmanuel, are you able to talk now? Can we hear you? Apparently not. Okay, TM, I think you can go ahead.
Thank you so much, Prof. Sibanda, for moderating, and thank you so much for the opportunity to deliver the opening remarks for FANAPAN. Before I go into the depth of my opening remarks, let me first pass the acknowledgement. Then first, let me appreciate the leadership of African Research Universities Alliance, ARUA, Center of Excellence in Sustainable Food Systems, which in short is called ARUA SFS. So we really appreciate the funding and also for the opportunity for us to be part of the project. However, let me also acknowledge fellow implementing partners, which are the University of Pretoria, the University of Ghana in Legon, University of Nairobi, and also colleagues from FANAPAN, and more specifically RUFORAM, who are coordinating the work that universities are doing. This is to make sure that research evidence is talking to practice, policy, and also is talking to making sure that we are informing the decision making in those spaces. So as FANAPAN, we are really proud of the partnership, and we are glad that we were part of the delivering of the project, and now that we are coming to an end. Then as part of my opening remarks, let me touch on some of the issues that are defining the state of the current food systems that we are trying to support. The first issue being that the current food system is functional, and evidence is showing that there are high rates of food insecurity and malnutrition. The other issue is that the changing and variable climate also is putting heavy pressure on already challenged system. The other issue that I would also want to put some spotlight on is that there are emerging shocks that have been caused by COVID-19 pandemic, and also the global and regional conflicts that are worsening the situation. These are disrupting how the food supply chains are operating. So these, in most cases, I call them wicked problems, and more often these are complex and interconnected. This then provide the background in terms of the work that we are doing and we're about to share here. And the backdrop is that food and nutrition security policies, strategies, and programs should respond to all these challenges, which in their own nature are wicked. And therefore, we really need to make sure that we are assisting the food system to provide for nutrition secure and climate resilient Africa. And therefore, then the issue about individual and institutional capacity then to FANAPAN is very important. This is to ensure that the policies, the strategies, and the programs that we seek to support then are implemented, and to make sure that after implementation, they are assessed for their impact. The other issue which then makes this project more relevant is that the time for introspection, I think, is ripe. So there's no better time to be reflecting on these issues. The study then provides an opportunity for us then to introspect and ask some questions in terms of how we are delivering, in terms of making sure that the food system then is making sure that people that are supposed to be fed and nourished are receiving those foods that we are trying to make sure that they are being delivered for. The main question that we need to reflect on, for me, is to what extent our food and nutrition security policies and strategies and programs are fit for purpose. And to answer this as a starting point, we need to examine the main policy that are related to framework documents that are part of the countries that we are focusing on, and namely the countries are Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa. And today we want to put the spotlight on Ghana, and we are doing that by examining some dimensions that are related to food and nutrition security. And to mention them, this deals with availability of food, access to food, utilization of food, and also, most importantly, stability, sustainability, and governance of the food systems. So we are not only focusing on this, but we want to make sure that we are also tackling issues of gender, women empowerment, and youth engagement. And these are pertinent to make sure that we cover the gaps that are plugging the various stages of policy engagement, and also making sure that the good policies that are there are implemented. Then, as part of my conclusion, then as FANAPAN, then we are delivering on three-pronged approach. And this focus on policy research analysis. This is to generate evidence. The second one is about policy advocacy and engagement. What is most important here is that we generate policy knowledge products and also the platforms that we convene. But the most important one, which is at the heart of the project, is capacity strengthening. And this, we are trying to make sure that all the stakeholders that are part of the food chain of policy engagement are capacitated to make sure that we are effectively implementing the related policies and programs. And because we are part to this research here, our aim as FANAPAN is to bridge the gap or the disconnect between the science that has been generated to make sure that that evidence then is talking to policy. Then with those few remarks, colleagues, then I wish you well, and I believe that the deliberation will further enrich the report that we are trying to make sure that is contextualized to deal with the wicked challenges that we are trying to solve. Program Director, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Chilidzi Madzwandila, CEO of FANAPAN. Thank you for those remarks. We're going to go on, and I'm going to ask our guest of honor here, who is Ms. Paulina Addy, the Director of Women in Agriculture Directorate in the Ministry of Food and Agriculture of Ghana, to give us the official opening of our roundtable webinar. Madam, if you are on, the floor is yours. Please confirm that Ms. Addy is there. I don't seem to see her on the list here.
She's not in yet, Prof.
She's not in. All right, I think we will consider that notwithstanding that official opening address not being there, that in spirit this is fine, and if and when she comes, we can give an opportunity to make those remarks. So let us move on and ask Prof. Hetty, if you are ready, you can please go ahead and give us the overview of the CaBFoodS-Africa project.
Thank you very much, Professor Chilidzi. Let me just put it on slideshow. Okay, so thank you very much for that we can participate in this webinar this morning. And I thought just to give you a little bit of background on what is ARUA, first of all. It is ARUA is a consortium of 17 universities in Africa that came together and said that we should try to harness knowledge within Africa and keep it within Africa. And we were successful as to obtain the Center of Excellence in Sustainable Food Systems as the University of Pretoria, together with our collaborators, the University of Ghana, Legon, and the University of Nairobi. and Professor Lindiwe Sibanda and myself and Professor Frans Swanepoel are involved in this particular Center of Excellence. So the vision of the center is to harness partnerships in research and innovation to drive agriculture and food system transformation in order to ensure sustainable food security and nutrition in Africa. And as Professor Sibanda very correctly said that, and reiterated by Dr. Stilitsi, is the best time to do it is right now, where we're in the middle of a pandemic, and a lot of gaps have been shown in our food systems. And this translates, of course, into food insecurity to a large extent, with an effect on nutrition. So the purpose of our Aroa SFS is to build a critical mass of researchers in Africa, to also conduct cutting-edge research, of which I truly believe that this will be presented today, and to generate global recognition of African scholarships, and to engage with stakeholders at grassroots and at policy levels. I just want to see, my screen didn't want to move on, but now it's working. So we have different focal areas. The first is improving Africa's herds, unleashing the potential of Africa's crops, to have safe, nutritious, and consumer-driven food, to have evidence-led food policy. And our new focus area that has recently been added is to have climate-smart food systems. And we follow a transdisciplinary research approach in order to attain that outcomes. So CaBFoodS specifically is one of the two flagship programs under the Aroa SFS. It is, we were successful in obtaining funding from the UKRI in the UK, who financially support this research that we will hear more about today. And again, I acknowledge my co-workers, Professor Sibanda Lindiwe and Dr. Beulah Pretorius. So in our partnership program for capacity building, we look at intellectual exchange and capacity building, as well as postgraduate training to talented students sharing academic resources across these 3 universities. And we have 5 themes within this program. The first theme is to build capacity in food security following different approaches. And we have hosted several short courses over the past 2.5 years in attaining that capacity building element. Our theme B is on retaining nutrient quality through complementary interventions. And theme C is on big data science through the lens of agriculture and food systems to build much needed skills. And we hosted a big data conference a week ago, together with the SRI, each day on one of each of these subjects, as mentioned in the previous slide. And then our theme D is on policies for optimal nutrition-sensitive options. And theme E is a high-level colloquium on ending hunger. Now, today we will focus specifically on theme D, where we partnered with Farrenpan to look at policies for optimal nutrition-sensitive options. Just some of the highlights of the capacity building grant for food security is that we have collaborative agreements with the University of Nairobi, with Ghana, with Farrenpan, and with BFAP. And as Farrenpan has indicated that they very much work closely with Roof Forum as well. We have currently 10 researchers that are conducting research in these 3 countries, and we have 150 15 participants from 11 African countries that we have trained to date, as we try not to discriminate against our other countries in Africa. If our researchers are interested or students are interested to participate in the training courses, we welcome them. We also hosted a safeguarding seminar with 8 presenters from the University of Pretoria, together with the University of Ghana, and I acknowledge Professor Irene's very strong leadership role that she also played during that safeguarding seminar. We trained a total of 55 participants in that safeguarding from 8 African countries, and they represented 13 institutions. So, and I think it's very true that we cannot tackle problems in isolation, and we can only try to work together and not in silos anymore, to try and have a breakthrough in what we are doing in the field. And I very much look forward to hear more about the in-country policies and programs that will be presented this morning. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Hetty, for that overview of the CaBFoodS-Africa project and the related initiatives that the Arua partnership is spearheading. So I'm just trying to see, Kanto, if you can help to check if Ms. Adi is, Paulina Adi is back online for the opening remarks. Otherwise, we can carry on.
Not yet, Prof.
Okay. So thank you very much. I think we're going to proceed now and invite Dr. Phyllis to give us the presentation on the study that she led in Ghana, which is the country study on the nutrition sensitivity of food and nutrition policies, strategies, and programs in Ghana. So if that's okay, we will proceed. Dr. Phyllis Ohene, you can go ahead and share your presentation and take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simba. So my name is Phyllis, as he introduced, and I would be taking you through the Ghana analysis. Just a minute as I share my screen.
And as she prepares to share the screen, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll have an opportunity to address them later on. Thank you. Carry on, please, Phyllis.
Okay. So this morning, I'll be talking to you about the policies for optimal nutrition sensitive options, specifically looking at the food and nutrition security policies, strategies, and programs in Ghana. So a quick outline for the presentation. I'll start with a brief overview on food and nutrition security, and then I'll hone in to talk about Ghana. And then I'll talk about the objectives of the study, the approaches we adopted, our main findings, and then a summary, which will be followed by recommendations. So the recommendations is grouped into the policy and practice recommendations and the research recommendations. So a quick background. Sub-Saharan Africa is currently facing a triple burden of malnutrition, and this includes undernutrition, obesity, and micronutrient deficiencies. And as we heard earlier in this webinar, COVID-19 has now become an added threat to our food systems because it has disrupted the global food systems and has threatened both physical and economic access to food. So in order to deal with this burden adequately, we need to have a food systems transformation. And in doing this, we are looking at comprehensive programs and coherent public policies to ensure that we are addressing both the supply and the demand side of food. Because traditionally, Africa tends to focus on the supply side of food by emphasizing production, but we also need to make sure that the demand side of food, looking at the nutrition and health outcomes, are also being met by a transformed food system. In doing this, we need to minimize the negative impacts and maximize our positive food system outcomes. And to do this, one of the key things we need to focus on is food and nutrition security. And food and nutrition security in our study was looking at the 4 dimensions of food security, which was food availability, the access to food, food utilization and consumption, and also the stability and sustainability of supply, which we merged with governance in this study. And we wanted to do this by prioritizing the nutrition sensitive approaches. So this is a conceptual framework of the food system and its interaction. So when we are talking about the food systems approach, we are trying to look at this whole system and see the linkages, look at the drivers, look at the outputs, so that ultimately we are making sure that our nutrition and health outcomes are being achieved by our food system. So if you look at all these contributors, you see that it ultimately affects our food supply chain, which here we are looking at the availability. It affects our food environment, affecting the access. And then ultimately the consumer behavior, which also affects the demand. And this would let us have diets which are of good quantity, quality, diversity, and safety to make sure that we have nutrition and health outcomes which are sustainable. And these are all ultimately linked to the Sustainable Development Goals. So the World Bank report on ending poverty and hunger by 2030 said in order to adopt nutrition sensitive approaches effectively, we need to focus on a few ideas. And these are incorporating explicit nutrition objectives and indicators into our agriculture investments, so nutrition sensitive agriculture, increasing access to year-round availability of nutrient-rich food, so emphasis on nutritious foods, improving the nutrition knowledge among households to enhance dietary diversity, because this dietary diversity has been shown in research to be a good mediator for nutrition outcomes, and also investing in women. So women empowerment is a key thing to safeguard and strengthen our food systems, because usually women who are well empowered and knowledgeable are able to influence the health and nutrition of their families. And a key thing is also ensuring that our food systems are resilient to climate and shocks, with the COVID-19 being a prime example of such shocks. So next on, I want to talk briefly about the food and nutrition security situation in Ghana. So generally, Ghana has made great strides in improving its food systems and food sufficiency over the past decades. We've been able to combat extreme food insecurity and high levels of child undernutrition, because our stunting rate is below the regional average, which is good. However, when you disaggregate this data, you see that some regional disparities exist, because the latest data on Ghana's stunting was 18% on the national level. But when you look at something like the northern region, you start to see rates as high as 33%, showing that there's regional disparities existing among these indicators. We're also able to achieve MDG1, which was halving poverty, but you still see these inequalities in national poverty rates persisting. And the good thing is we have a wide range of stakeholders who are involved in discussions on Ghana's food system transformation. And some of these stakeholders are on this call this evening. Thank you for being here. But we also experience challenges with food security in Ghana and our food systems and nutrition. One of the key emerging issues we have is the increased overweight and obesity rates, which is resulting from our food environment, which is providing access to a lot of ultra-processed and unhealthy foods. Currently, about 1 in 2 women of reproductive age are overweight in Ghana. There's also increasing urban food insecurity due to rapid urbanizations of cities like Accra, which is now making it difficult for urban food security, which is actually increasing, although food insecurity generally is decreasing in the country. You have high vulnerability to the effects of climate change, low technology in agriculture, and inadequate funding, limited capacity building being other issues identified. So we'll move on to the aims and objectives of the study. The aim of this study is to contribute to evidence generation and capacity building initiatives by generating this report on the status of food and nutrition security policies and strategies in Ghana. And doing this, we want to identify the key gaps and also assess these strategies and policies through a gender responsive lens, basically focusing on women and the youth. Sorry. So how did we go about this? The approach we used was three-pronged. So we did I started with a literature research on the contextual nature of Ghana's food and nutrition security, and also did a search for the policies, strategies, and programs which are currently being implemented in Ghana. So I was able to look on government agency websites and also looking at the FOLX website to come up with some of these policies and strategies, and was able to review the full text policies that I identified. So in the review of these policies, we used an adapted FAO tool, which I'll talk about in the next slide. And then we went on after the depth review to have key informant interviews with the idea of finding out if there are any challenges, any key knowledge gaps, evidence gaps, and also recommendations from our key informants and stakeholders. So the tool we used was a checklist, which was adapted from the FAO Guiding Principles for Nutrition Sensitive Agriculture, focusing on the 4 dimensions of food security. So we assessed the extent to which these documents and policies that we identified will be able to add value and address the different dimensions of nutrition and food security. So looking at this table, this is the policy, strategy, or plan, and then we'll assess it looking at the food availability. How does it address food availability, food access, utilization, and sustainability? And there was always the gender and youth lens attached to the analysis. So in total, I analyzed 17 policy strategies and plans, which were identified and grouped them under different policy sectors. So we had the national development policies, which was the National Medium-Term Development Policy Framework, the most recent one, which is running from 2022 to 2025, the Ghana Shared Growth and Development Agenda, and there were agriculture sector policies, including the Food and Agriculture Sector Development Policy, the Ghana Agriculture Investment Plan, Investing for Food and Jobs. Then there was the Nutrition and Health Sector policies, the National Nutrition Policy, Food Safety Policy, the NCD's policy and strategy. We also looked at climate sector policies, including the Ghana National Climate Change Policy and the Food Security Action Plan. The gender and social protection policies were the Ghana School Feeding Policy, the Gender and Agriculture Development Strategy, National Social Protection Policy, and also had a look at the Ghana Trade Policy. So what was the main findings? I'm going to discuss the findings based on the 4 dimensions. So we'll start with the food availability. So the priority areas we're concentrating on in food availability was facilitating increased and sustainable production of diversified nutrient-dense crops with emphasis on indigenous and orphan crops, and also maintaining and improving the natural resource base, improving the post-harvest processing storage of food, food safety, and all of them had the women and youth lens. So we generally realized from the analysis that the national development policies adequately addressed all these priority areas, but there was a dichotomy between the agriculture sector policies and the nutrition and health policies, where the emphasis on the agriculture sector policies is on food production, and this is usually linked to income generation and exports and such economic activities, and not always explicitly linked to the nutrition and health outcomes. Whilst the nutrition and health sector policies focused a lot on these outcomes, and so sometimes we're missing in things like natural resource management, which is key to agriculture production. The social sector policies were able to mainstream gender and youth into most of these, into the food availability initiatives, and there was a good emphasis on income generation. But as I earlier mentioned, there wasn't enough emphasis on linking it with nutrition outcomes. And there also wasn't enough emphasis on addressing urban food insecurity, although some of the agriculture sector policies did make mention of it. And food safety was largely limited to the value chain and consumer engagement level, but at the farm production level, this was not always evident. So we did this table where we looked at So on the left side, in the first column, you see the different policies abbreviated. And then we looked at the different priority areas and how well they were covered by each policy. And generally, if you look at the last row, you can see that over 75% of the policies usually addressed the first three areas. But when it came to food safety, this dropped to about 68%, which was mostly due to the farm production level, as I mentioned earlier, and women and youth was not always fully explicit in these priority areas. So that was also around 69%. So we move on to food access. Here, the priority areas was expanding markets and market access for vulnerable groups, empowering and protecting women and the poor, and targeting the vulnerable populations in order to improve equity. So we saw that the national development plans and the agriculture sector policies usually were able to address most of these priority areas. The national nutrition policy was very good at addressing the access to food because it talked about social and cultural access to food. There was some emphasis on the food environment from the NCD's policy and strategy to try and regulate access in the food environment. And most policies were able to adequately mainstream gender, where you had the Ghana school feeding policy actually advocating for inclusion of men in nutrition, so that it's not seen as the role of the woman to make sure that we have our nutrition outcomes. And there was also mention of good nutrition sensitive social protection programs like the LEAP, the variant of the LEAP 1000 and the Ghana school feeding program. However, one key thing we noticed was there was little emphasis on women empowerment in the Ghana livestock development policy, which was a bit concerning, as evidence suggests that usually when there's improved access to formal markets, the power of women actually diminish in these circumstances. So there has to be the intention to make sure that women are incorporated in formal markets and access to it. There was also not enough emphasis, especially in implementation, when it came to people living with disabilities and the elderly as a vulnerable population. And there was also a target of 40% in the gender and agriculture development policy for women, 40% of women in all agriculture decision-making processes, which had not yet been attained. And there was the issue of evidence-based targeting, whether in some of these policies like the LEAP and the LEAP 1000, if we need to start looking at food security indicators as part of the target and not just the income levels. And there was also the need to address smallholder farmers, especially in the trade policy, where they talked about equitable pricing, but there was no target for smallholder farmers. So this is the table reproduced for the food access in Ghana. And we see that about 73% of policies talked about markets. We had the lowest with the empower and protecting women and the poor, where we had 3 being partly covered and 2 not being well covered. And I did mention that in there. So if we talk about food utilization, the main one we were looking at was incorporating nutrition promotion and education into the policy areas. So here, we realized that most of the policies, all the policies addressed under nutrition, which has traditionally been the issue in Ghana. But then we had the medium-term national development policy framework, the Ghana, which was the national development policies, and the national nutrition policy being the ones to address the triple burden, where they talked about the 3 different malnutrition that we are currently facing outside of the traditional undernutrition, which is addressed in most of the policies. Dietary diversity was prioritized and emphasized in most of the policies, as this was usually linked to nutrition outcomes. And food safety was also well addressed in the context of food utilization. We also had 3 documents talking about water and sanitation and hygiene, which is a critical factor in good nutrition because it's seen as an underlying factor for malnutrition. For the gaps, there was a low emphasis on overweight and obesity interventions, especially by the agriculture sector policies. And we also need to put more emphasis on the role of men in ensuring good nutrition for women and children, because there are different pathways which lead to optimal maternal nutrition. And usually the role of the men and even other caregivers, including sometimes grandmothers and other family members, are important to ensure that we have optimal maternal and child nutrition. And there wasn't much emphasis noted in that. And another key thing was adolescent girls were not always very well targeted for food utilization interventions, but we do know that in Ghana, there is a high burden of anemia in such girls. In my key informant interviews, I do know some development partners are working with the Ghana Health Service to try and provide iron and folate supplementations and things like that. But these need to be very clear in the policy so that it can go straight away into the implementation. So that was a key gap I noticed as well. So replicating the table for food utilization in Ghana, we see that in terms of nutrition promotion and education, which was our priority area, almost 75% of policies were able to cover this, but they did not explicitly talk about women, and youth was actually very minimal emphasis in most of them, because when you look at the partly covered, most of it was the youth who were not emphasized. And in this case, the adolescent girls will fall under this section as well. So the last dimension is the stability, sustainability, which we meshed with governance. So here we're looking at governance in terms of multi-stakeholder collaboration, intersectoral collaboration, increasing incentives so that we can have the availability, access, and consumption of diverse, nutritious, and safe food. We also were looking at some of the monitoring systems, capacity building systems, and the general implementation progress for the policies, including if there is an implementation framework with nutrition and food security objectives and indicators. So one key thing I realized is all the policies and strategies prioritize multi-sectoral collaboration, which is one of the strengths of Ghana. There is quite a lot of key stakeholders who are engaged in the food systems and nutrition security talk at the moment. So this was reflected in our policies, where there was prioritization of multi-sectoral collaboration, private sector engagement to ensure stability of food supply. Generally, the policies mention good coordination at the national level, but some key informant interviews and even some of the implementation documents I read showed that coordination at sub-national level was not as good at the national level. And the National Nutrition Policy supports nutrition coordination mechanisms from the national to the district level. And even talked about having a separate nutrition budget line, which are all very good for governance. And there was also different models which were spelled out in different policies to incentivize the availability and access to food, which some included government subsidies. We had some about tax reliefs. We had some about financial incentives for private sector and smallholder farmers. And there's also adequate emphasis on the need for research and capacity building. All the policies had government funding as part of the funding mechanisms, which was also a good sign. And only 6 of the documents had an implementation framework, which had outcome indicators. You had some which had a plan of action, but there was no outcome indicators. And this was a key gap we noted, because you need these nutrition and health indicators to be able to track progress, and even impact indicators in nutrition to track long-term progress. And this was sometimes missing in some of the documents. And we also need to identify how communities will be able to partake in the governance and spell out the right system, which is good for our country. Some of the implementation challenges noted was low policy awareness at the subnational levels, inadequate clarity and structures for implementation. There was always the issue of inadequate funding, and then sometimes the coordination among sector and key actors, especially at the subnational level. So this is the table well replicated. As I mentioned earlier, the governance issue was quite well covered, as well as the capacity building issue in most of these policies. And the area that had the least being covered was the objectives and indicators, which I mentioned were only 40%, only 6 of them were able to give the clear outcome indicators which could track progress. I am aware there were some policies which had implementation plans separate from them, but I couldn't get access to them. So maybe that's something we can discuss in the webinar afterwards. And also the incentives was not always available, but when available, there was quite a wide range of different incentives being trialed in order to promote availability and access. So in summary, I hope the study and this presentation has been able to give a brief snapshot of the food, nutrition, and security policies and strategies in Ghana. So, and the key gaps in the policies relating to the 4 dimensions have also been adequately presented to you. Ghana has made good strides policy-wise generally to address all these 4 dimensions, and even implementation-wise, looking at the implementation progress. However, we still have some key gaps which was identified. And firstly is the resources. Generally, the drive is for resources to be allocated to rural areas, but food insecurity is rising in urban areas, especially in urban informal settlements. So the issue of urban agriculture and peri-agriculture has to be something we focus on moving forward. And there was also the issue of data monitoring and integrated systems in terms of reporting on the different policy progress in terms of reporting for implementation progress to ensure that the different sectors are all participating in the governance. There is limited data on it at the moment. And although the multi-sectoral collaboration is evident in all the policies, you could still see the emphasis, whether if it was agriculture, its emphasis on production and income, and if it was nutrition and health, its emphasis on nutrition goals. And this dichotomy should not exist ideally. So we need to strengthen the collaboration so that it's not like each sector is prioritizing its main goals to the exclusion of the other goals. Most of the policies and strategies suffer from lack of adequate funding for successful implementation, which was heard in most of the key informant interviews. And most of the frameworks do not have clearly articulated outcome indicators, especially relating to nutrition. And there was also very little outcome indicators for gender and the youth. So it was mentioned in most of the policies, but in the frameworks, you couldn't see the indicators which would be used to track the objectives which have been described in the policy. So I'll end with the recommendations. The first one is recommendations for policy and practice. So we need to strengthen the use of the food systems approach to address our food and nutrition security, making sure that we are looking at the various linkages, the drivers, the contributors, the different sectors to solve the issue of improved diets for all. We also need to increase production of nutrient-dense and diversified food, especially in urban areas. The issue of backyard vegetable gardens is something that has been discussed as a good recommendation in urban areas. And then incentivizing production of nutritious food. And in addition to that, introducing disincentives in the form of like SSB taxes, taxes for health taxes, basically, to make sure that we are disincentivizing people from accessing these ultra-processed foods. And then evidence-based implementation. So we need to be able to know the policy implementation instruments which work best for our country, especially in the incentivizing investment and participation by the private sector. We need to strengthen the nutrition coordination mechanism, which currently exists but needs to be strengthened. Implement the nutrition budgets, which has been spelled out in the National Nutrition Policy. And this budget should be able to be transparent and tracked so that we can get accountability. And then the policy and program M&E frameworks should always include the explicit food security and nutrition indicators, because if not, then it's difficult to be able to track the progress of these indicators and objectives, which are spelled out in the documents. And the innovation should also be focused a lot on adolescent girls, because in addition to carrying a high burden of the nutrition deficiencies, there's also the issue of the vicious cycle of intergenerational malnutrition when the mothers are adolescent girls who are usually malnourished. In terms of recommendations for research, which was one of our objectives, we need research in a few key areas. One of them is we need to research on the basic set of indicators which will be able to deliver to us our main food and nutrition outcomes in line with our capacity in Ghana. We need to look at the best approaches for funding, which includes the public sector, and innovative mechanisms to include the private sector, include communities, so that we have this blended financing mechanisms to solve the chronic issue of inadequate funding. We need to look at the best governance approach based on country case studies, which would help using different leadership structures, top down, bottom up, to try and see what works best for our context. We need to investigate the most effective incentives, which end up improving nutrition outcomes, and not just improving economic outcomes, but also having that added indicator of nutrition outcomes. Because it's not when you have increased income, but there is no dietary diversity, we still end up failing to achieve our nutrition and health outcome goals. So this should be something that we look into for the most effective incentives to improve our main goals, which is the nutrition outcomes, and create a functional public-private partnership. And there's also the issue of the greenhouse gas mitigation. Usually most of the policies we're looking at climate in terms of climate resilient agriculture to make sure that we still have access to food, but agriculture also contributes to greenhouse gas emissions, which would affect our environment. So that's also something we need to look at so that we can quantify the co-benefits of which best adaptation measures to make sure that we are having our demand and supply all being sustainable. Thank you. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Phyllis, for that presentation. I know that the study is a lot more detailed than what we could present in 30 minutes. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. So we can, maybe if you stop sharing, I can be able to see who is raising their hands or wanting to intervene. So the next thing we want to do is, before we open up the discussion to everyone, is to just hear from some panelists that have agreed to come forward and be discussants to this presentation that we've just had. I don't know if Ms. Paulina Addy is now online. Kanto, are you able to give me a feedback on that? I know that we have Mr. Joseph Bandana, who is Principal Technologist at CSIR and Research Center and Gender Officer. So we can maybe start with him. Yes, I see Joseph is still online. Maybe I've got maybe a couple of brief questions to check with you. In terms of, you noted one of the things that came up was limited participation in governance, especially by consumers, and I would imagine the other sort of marginalized groups, governance of our food systems. What would you say would be the measures that we would need to put in place to increase the voice, the voices of these stakeholders and other vulnerable groups in decision-making about the food system in Ghana? I know that this is more like an ambush. You probably haven't thought much of this, but feel free to ad-lib and add anything else you would want to comment on based on the presentation that you've just listened to.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. First of all, I'll thank Phyllis for the very wonderful presentation she's done.
Thank you.
In terms of the governance framework, I would say a major thing we can do to include the excluded, if I may say, that's a very vulnerable group in terms of empowering gender and then encouraging food and nutrition security, is for us to target properly. From my experience working with groups, what I've noticed is that nutritional outcomes are better achieved when we do proper targeting, be it adolescent groups, be it women groups, because the best outcomes, even in terms of food and nutrition security, in terms of women empowerment in agriculture, is through organized groups. So farmer-based organizations that are led or women-led, when those are targeted, will be able to ensure the food system is sustained while empowering women to live to their best. Because generally, the multiple nutritional challenges, women are always at the receiving end. So when we target groups that are women-led, then we'll be able to take them out of that situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Yeah, you feel free to come back on later on, but let's move on. We were meant to hear from a government representative. I don't know, apart from Ms. Paulina Adi, do we have any other participants who come from government? We know that you may not necessarily be representing government in your response, but just feel free to, to talk as a participant. Do we have anyone? Please go ahead and indicate, either raise your hand or you can also use the chat. Do we have anybody else that would want to represent government? Or any government ministry? It doesn't really matter whether it's agriculture, health or whichever. Please feel free. We also had private sector representative. I'm trying to check if they are online. This is the challenge we have with online and people having difficulties connecting. Is Mrs. Ramatu Tsotso Sai Giema, is she online? Apparently not. So yeah, in that case, we'll just open up the discussion to, to everyone. Feel free to indicate if you want to say something, to contribute. I know that we had a number of gaps that Phyllis noted. The one issue was the issue of coordination. How can we improve coordination among sectors and different food and nutrition security actors and stakeholders, particularly at the subnational level? If anybody has got a response to that, but otherwise feel free to come through and ask any question. I mean, the presentation covered quite a wide range of issues, covering issues of production, productivity, climate change, and management of natural resources. And in all cases, we're always looking at the gender, women empowerment, and youth, which, as we noted, is probably the weakest link across the board. Any comments, any questions, please feel free to come through.
Prof, I see Ramatu Sai here, and Joseph Bandana raised his hand. Yeah.
Okay, so let's hear first of all from the private sector, from Mrs. Ramatu Tsotso. Can you hear me? Are you able to speak?
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity. My name is Ramatu. I can hear you clearly.
Thank you.
What I didn't raise my hand. I was trying to put my thoughts through, but I guess once I have the opportunity, let me just make some few points. First of all, I think I have really enjoyed the presentation. It's fully packed with a lot of insights that can help a lot of entrepreneurs like us who are very focused on driving good nutrition into families, especially with the current situation where, we have focused working mothers who are very career driven, and so they don't have time enough to prepare the good nutritious food. So it's really good insights that should help with the kind of formulations we put across to give nutritious foods to their families, which we also seek to deliver as ChopBox Express. That's the name of our business. And it should take a shorter cooking time, basically that. But what I wanted to know, I think when the presenter, Phyllis, I think, mentioned the policies and things that can be found in the policy and those that cannot be found. I just want to find out, is it just finding in policy and being executed physically, or is just found in the policy? That's just one of the things that was, top of my mind. Because if it's part of policy is being executed, then I'm sure that we should be able to find out whether we are actually getting the right agricultural practices happening to give us, good farm produce to help even produce the nutritional output we want to give to the families that we are trying to cater for. So are we even executing in the first place? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mrs. Ramat. So let me park that one for now. I think Phyllis is going to come back on that. I'll give her an opportunity to respond. But as a representative of the private sector, I've got a couple of questions that I'm posing, kind of turning the tables on you, because we want to hear from you as a representative of the private sector. You did mention, of course, that you focusing, and it's one of your objectives, how you address the issues of career women who may not have time. So I imagine that your company maybe provides an option to address the challenge of meals and meal preparation, etc. But let me not go ahead of myself. So the question I would want to ask is, one of the things that Alice mentioned, but not in too much, Phyllis, sorry, not in too much detail, was the issue where, particularly in the Ghana National Agriculture Investment Plan, where the government is coming up with the policies, implementation instruments, where they're putting up things like tax breaks, risk sharing and risk reduction approaches, so that they encourage the private sector to play a more meaningful role in the agriculture and food system space. So the question I would like to ask, first of all, is to what extent have you actually noted, because you raised an important issue, is the study was looking largely on whether these issues are mentioned in the policies. We did try to a limited extent to ask the question about whether these policy measures were being implemented or executed, to use your word. So that's important. So what I want to know is to what extent have these instruments actually made a difference to you representing private sector? Have you seen any meaningful change in the way government is helping you as private sector to invest more, play a more meaningful role in the food space? That's one question. And then depending on how you respond to that, I've got another question, which I think is usually leveled at the agri-food industry, which I would also want to raise afterwards. But maybe you can address the first question. If you had a feel of whether the government policies in the way you engage with them, whether they've been encouraging to the private sector, using your own case as an example.
Okay, yeah, that's a very good question. I started food processing just in the week that we had the COVID lockdown in Ghana. And so it was quite an interesting period for me, where I kept asking myself, with these products that I've started, I get, families wanting, craving to have them. I even started without branding, and they were still calling out for it because we're all in the house. The question I kept asking was, how can I get my registration through? Getting FDA coming on board. What do I even need to do? I didn't even know where to ask some of these questions. So it was through a lot of friends, networking with other people, that I got to know of the Ghana Enterprises Agency. It's one of the key agencies that government has. And I think in the past year or two that I actually joined, I have seen, and that's when I have really heard, and I think they are making a lot more noise than they should have in the past. So if you ask, I would say yes, there's an agency, which is the Ghana Enterprises Agency. And they focus a lot more on the small scale businesses, and they give a lot of preferences to women in businesses, women in with manufacturing, especially those doing, local productions. And it's for that reason that they supported my business to get the FDA now to give us a certification for the facility we have, and even register one of our products at no cost to us. It was to open the way, show us the path, and then now we can now move on with the other products and then start to, understand the system and regularize our products. That's to that extent, I would say that the government, together with the agency, has done a great job. It's a very great step, because in the past, and most women I encountered before I got my business running, just had a lot of issues just to get FDA because it was costing so much. And for a startup, it was just a lot of money. When I did my analysis on the amount I was going to spend just to do my FDA certification for all my products, I just told myself that, look, I'm just going to keep trying to sell in consumer homes until I feel I find my feet to be able to afford, and then I'll start going ahead to get my certification. It was so much. And I think there are lots of women out there who don't know about it. The good thing is now they are making a lot more noise. Now with social media, people are getting more engaged, especially through WhatsApps. Today you are there, you get a message. Ghana Enterprises Agency is doing this today. You are here. This agency is bringing this on board. So there's a lot happening. And there's a lot of collaboration also with, foreign agencies. Like we have the MasterCard, and then we have GIZ. So for instance, the free certification was sponsored by the MasterCard. So some of these things, they are getting support. It's now time to make a lot more noise for some of us to hear, especially the new ones coming on board. And then we need to create the help desk or the customer desk that should go way ahead to let a lot of these businesses know, so they can give them that support, because it's not just with the registration, but they also give non-financial support, giving you the Ghana Enterprises Agencies launched the business resource centers just last week, and they invited a lot of entrepreneurs on board, and they are opening up a lot of these centers to offer even some of these management services would have paid a lot more consultancy on, to give that advice on how to go about some of these things. So that's for me, from that direction, that's how I have benefited. And that I think the government can do more, because a lot of more, entrepreneurs need to hear more to be able to know who to channel their issues to, where to get the support, how to go about it. So that's really one of the key things for me. I would say that I have benefited as a business, and I think I have seen as well a lot more entrepreneurs now enjoying.
Thank you. So the 2 points, or at least 1 point I'm picking up there, is the issue that government needs. Obviously, they've got all these facilities, but it's important that people know that these facilities do exist. So the awareness is important, the issue of information. And as Pandana said earlier on, it's important to target. So we need to see government, going out there and really being, providing the services that they are meant to provide. So you obviously came in at the thick of things with the advent of COVID, and we know that there were disruptions in food systems, but we are also aware that there is a lot of fingers being pointed at the agri-food industry, in that they've been accused of contributing to the problem of increased obesity, especially in urban areas, by supplying ultra-processed, high-salt, high-sugar foods I imagine, I don't know if this is an issue for you, but how would you see the private sector actually helping to address this as a private sector taking the initiative to say, we're good citizens, we're going to make sure that we reduce this burden? I don't know if you want to comment on that, if your experience has been such that you have heard of this problem, but that's one of the things that Phyllis flagged up, that yes, we're getting obesity as one of the issues we're having to grapple with. Any comment?
Okay, so thank you. And I think it's very interesting. I had a discussion with someone just yesterday about this. First of all, urbanization has, influenced a lot of things that people do, changing our lifestyles to the extent of the kind of foods we eat. And if you really study the Ghanaian, we tend to adore a lot more of imports than our locals. I was telling the person, a lot of these imports have quite a number of sugar in there. The obesity situation, it's nothing new, but if you really study for instance, the northern part of the country versus the urbanized part like Accra, the urban areas are eating or consuming a lot of these, foods that are imported, and we feel, oh, that is the ish, that is what everyone is enjoying. But when you start getting them to enjoy the local foods, the local cereals we have, like the Tom Browns, which is very common, no food producer puts sugar even in Tom Brown. They are all made from local grains. Really, how are we contributing to the obesity? For me, I think it's a lot of sugar that is contributing to these things. Drinks is one, and you find a lot of it now, all over in the market. And I personally say that if we are able to kind of restrict the kind of imports that come in, and rather support the local food producers who are doing or processing, go into agro food processing, supporting them, guiding them, you would realize that they will be able to produce the best that we all need without necessarily importing some of these things coming in. I produce, and I am trying so much to work with the food research to even help me with my nutritional facts and the kind of consumption that should be in. These are all the kind of things that we need as entrepreneurs, food processors, to guide the production we do, because some of them also produce without some of the nutritional facts information. People are not even checking; they just want to eat. So there's a lot that should be done, especially when it comes to lifestyle change, government restricting the kind of imports we have, and then as internally food processors, we need to work a lot with, even the university, and then the food research needs to be guiding the kind of nutritional facts or the content we have in our food produce to guide us. Because if I'm exporting food right now outside, I am limited to a certain amount of sugar within a certain product. And therefore, if it's in excess, they will reject the food. The same way, we should have such standards here to guide even the kind of things, we produce and add into our food. But they cannot point all fingers at food processors locally. A lot of the obesity is actually caused as a result of the imports we consume, and not even the local foods.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sure somebody will give us a solution to the challenge that is posed by imported food. But for now, thank you very much. We appreciate your insights, Mr. Ramotso. Let me go back. I know that earlier on, Joseph, you wanted to come in. There was also another hand, I think, which had, I'm not sure who it was now. But Joseph, do you want to come in and before we go to the other participants to give their inputs? And then Mohammed, you are next.
Yes, so on the issue of obesity, I would say so far, Ghana has done well in promoting for the consumption of 4-star diets among households, though the consumption of ultra foods are also still on the rise. But I would say largely, we still record most of these obesity issues because one, the deficiency in information on 4-star diets across the country, and then two, which is even the most important one, in terms of the physical activity level of individuals or households, it's a very key issue when it comes to the concern of obesities. Because working with farmers, you get to realize that farmers who are known to be physically active and more engaged in farm work would have probably have some normal levels of growth, but then you get to realize that most of them are either underweight or obese, which is a great source of concern. So meaning the emphasis on 4-star diet consumption, it is something that should still be focused. And like I said earlier, we should target the affected and the vulnerable, which is women and then the youth. I think in Fali's presentation, she indicated that increase in income might not necessarily lead to dietary diversity. I think the comment I have on that is that most of the interventions do not target diets per se. Most of the interventions, the key objective is just to achieve income for farmers. So I think for project planning and implementation purposes, the target should also be focused on interventions that would bring about income, but interventions that farmers or the users can also consume, which brings about diversity. Let me give an example. So for instance, if you want to empower a women group into poultry production, yes, it's important, but if they don't consume the eggs that comes out of it, then we'll still have the same issue. So they can have income, but then they have other household responsibilities to spend their income on. So the diet bit of it will be lost. But then interventions that would encourage farmers to have diversity on their farm, especially families that consume directly from their farm, is key in ensuring that we are able to have healthy families. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph, for those comments. Yeah, so just so that we don't forget, there was a question I think that Mrs. Ramoso posed to Phyllis. Phyllis, do you want to address that before I invite Mohammed to come on?
I think that the question was if the policies were related to implementation.
Yes, yeah. It was really the question of whether we're talking about the issues that we covered is in the checklist being included in the policies, or was it about execution, which is the implementation?
So it was primarily about the policies, because having these evidence-based policies is supposed to be directed into implementation. So if you don't have the policy in place, then we cannot get to the implementation. So I was looking to see that most of these priority areas are something that is being covered in our policies, because most of these policies ideally would have an implementation framework with outcome indicators for you to track. So primarily we looked at it in the policies, and then we did a bit of trying to find out how these policies have been implemented to date. So looked at a lot of some documents which have looked at certain aspects of the policies already, and also talked to a few key informant interviews on their view on how it is being implemented. So it was a combination of both.
Okay. All right. So that's, I hope, so it's a question of whether in the first instance, we need to see that those issues are indeed covered in the policies, because if they are not, the chances are the implementation strategies would not actually address those issues. Then, of course, the issue of implementation is key, because without implementation, then as everybody seems to say, Africa is great policies, these are documents, but implementation is a major challenge. So let's hear from Mohammed.
Yes, thank you so much for to all the presenters and all those who have made comments already. I also want to add that in improving the food security status in the Ghanaian situation, this organization called AGI, Association of Ghana Industries, it is they represent the mouthpiece of all small and medium scale industries in Ghana. And as part of their programs, they try as much as possible to standardize the food that individual enterprises produce. Most enterprises are into production, processing of food and what have you. So at the level of processing, our food system, our food products are usually contaminated. So they play a major role in building the capacity of these enterprises through capacity building workshops or individual industry level contacts. As I say this, I have been a mentor in their food system sensitive program. A support they had from the Food and Agriculture Organization to conduct this form of training. So a lot has been gained through this development of the food system in Ghana. So that is just my take on the aspect of food system improvement in Ghana. And then my second one comment is not a comment, it is a question to Phyllis, that I'm so happy to hear her presentation, especially that their research try to harmonize the food system research or studies in Ghana. But what I found missing or want to know is how did they measure the governance system of the 4 areas of food security? When she was talking of not covered, partly covered, well covered, I see that they try to attach percentages to it. I will be very happy to know how they measure all those parameters. So that is my comment and a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. We'll take note of that question. The other points that you gave us on AGI, I think that's information that's worth noting. The fact that the association is actually pushing capacity development for its members. So let's take a few more comments before I'll ask Phyllis to respond. I'm just trying to check whose hand is up. Yeah, my apologies if I don't pronounce your name properly. It's Dele Tolobons. Maybe you can help with the pronunciation as you filled your comment.
Yes, thank you very much. I just want to thank you for that presentation. I was just wondering when she was trying to say that, my question is that how was she able to conclude that obesity is due to imported food and that it is not actually genetic or the lifestyle of the people? Because it was said that what the imported is what is causing the obesity. I don't know, was there a study on that? Are there evidences that show that yes, the imported ones are the one causing the obesity, or that it is genetic or their lifestyle, sedentary? Maybe these are the possibility. I don't know what she has to say with that. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, I imagine that this question is directed at
to Phil. Is it Phyllis or something?
Mrs. Ramos.
No, I think it was me. I made the comment. It's not Phyllis.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Someone made the comment.
So if you recall, I mentioned that we have an influx of a lot of drinks on the market, which is highly sugar, which is highly concentrated. Okay. Apart from that, a lot of the foods we get imported into the country. Even the kind of meat, chicken we get into the country, is a lot of fat in there. It's not as if, you know, I am a woman, I cook, I know what I buy, and I know what I see. Now, these are the things that we hardly even get to do. When I'm producing a product here in Ghana, I am very concerned about the regularization I'll get, the way the authorities are going to scrutinize me. But when it comes to imports in the country, honestly, you just take a look. Go read the labels on products. That is when you will see. I take a lot of pain to read nutritional facts on products because I'm very concerned about what I'm consuming in. And I'm telling you for a fact, aside that, I mentioned lifestyles that people have. So apart from consuming these things, a lot of sedentary work, which someone also mentioned, which is part of it. Today, our children are going to school. They don't even get the time to go for physical education, exercise whatsoever. It's all part of the lifestyle. But majority of it is what we consume in that then even sits in, because the more calories you consume, then the more you even get these things happening to you if you don't do a lot of these exercises. And so for me, I continue to raise that the kind of food we eat, if you don't read labels, you'll be misled and you continue to consume a lot of these calories in, and it's going to cause a lot of that obesity we have in the system.
Yeah. So the question, I think the issue of genetics or otherwise, I don't know that our genetics has changed much in the last, in the short, even going back to independence or before, and people, obesity was fairly low. So probably you would say lifestyle and whatever we're eating could be the major culprits here. But so the other question though related to that, because you're mentioning that one of the key factors, the influx of these imported foods, are you saying that government is a bit lax on enforcing standards on imported foods? Is this the implication?
That is it.
So do we need to see government tightening things there?
Exactly. So the imports that come in needs to be tightened.
Moderator, I'm wondering how the government is actually focusing on the locals and then not paying attention to the one imported. That is a very serious oversight. Why should they be controlling the one from within and they can't control the one coming from outside? I think it's not the best at all. We need to really, the government needs to sit up because it's a very serious issue. If it is true that they have standard for the local people, but no standard for the imports, then it means we should be very careful as a nation or as a people what our government is doing. They need to be told the truth so that we can see how they can buckle up and make sure that yes, all imported things are also, they have the same standard. Those coming in and those that is from within should have the same standard. That would be a better check for us. Thank you, sir.
Okay, that's a good point. I don't know if we have anyone who is associated with the trade ministry or that sector would want to comment on that. You can probably help us out of this one. We want to be fair as well to government, but I see that we have a hand from Edward Jusu.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it has been a very good presentation. But my concerns are, she was stressing on the issue of reading the labels or the inscriptions on the foods that are imported. In several occasions in Sierra Leone, we have seen that some of those labels are even deceitful. They may not be giving the true picture of the foods that are actually being packaged in where the labels are. And so therefore, the standard bureau, and it is almost always not very possible that our standard bureaus in our countries are absolutely checking every food imported into the country. So therefore, the labels may be very deceiving, and therefore we don't need to believe that. And also, the other possibility is also even those that are importing, the business people that are importing those foods, they sometimes change the date, the expiry date, and so therefore there are a lot of issues with regard to imported food. And so therefore, we need also to be very careful about that. The other thing also which Sierra Leone has done, we have also passed the breastfeed substitute into our law in Sierra Leone for children. And so therefore, we also need to see how those policies are working. And as of now, we are monitoring to see how government is following up in terms of importation of those type of foods. But we have also to be very, very mindful of the fact that the labels
We lose Edward. I know we seem to have lost Edward maybe when he comes back, but the point he was raising was really the issue of labels, the fact that yes, they may have information, but that information may not be authentic, which basically goes back to government tightening up the inspectorate side and enforcement and not just believing everything they see on the labels. So let me go back to Phyllis and see if you can respond to the question that Mohammed raised. How did you measure how did you measure the different parameters where you say covered or not covered or partially covered? What was the basis for the measurement in the things that you presented? I think that was the question. Phyllis, if you can respond to Mohammed on that one. Then I'll go to the chat box after that to raise the issues there.
So the analysis was basically done with the tool that I gave you a brief description of. So looking at the priority areas that we had spelled out, if you are looking at food availability, you want to see that how much emphasis is being placed on production of nutritious foods, how much emphasis is being placed on maintaining the natural resource, how much emphasis is being placed on food safety. So looking at these different priority areas, by going through the document, you can see if this is being addressed, if the policy objectives, the strategies, the programs, the implementation framework talks about these different priority areas and how they are being implemented. And we looked at it all with the lens of, are these also targeting women and youth? So if we are talking about access, are they specifically mentioning that women are being supported to access markets, women are being supported to access credits, women are being supported to access land security? So that's how we did it, looking at the different priority areas under the different dimensions. I looked through the documents to make sure that are these being addressed, are these, so the ones which are partly covered, it means they made mention of it, but it wasn't given into detail how this is supposed to be achieved or enough detail about how this is a priority area in the documents. And those that is not covered, then it means that little mention was made of it in the document.
Thank you. So let me just go through some of the comments in the chat so that some are questions, others are comments. Comment here from Prof. Emmanuel Osafo. He says, with regard to undernutrition and obesity, I think obesity, especially among young people, could also be due to insufficient exercise, resulting in unnecessary deposition of weight. And so that's, I think that came up earlier on, lifestyle. We also need to look at how food is distributed at the table. In many homes in Ghana, the men eat most of the protein or energy, followed by the boys, and then the women last. So this is a question of intra-household food allocation or access. Maybe this is something we may want to throw open to all participants to comment. Is this still a major issue? Traditionally, I know that most societies in Africa, this is or was a problem. Is this still a major issue? Does it need addressing even at policy level and interventions by different stakeholders? It says we need to have a paradigm shift to improve the nutritional status of young people at home. And the question that Emmanuel posed was, did this come up in the study? So the issue of intra-household allocation. So that's one. The next one says, did the study identify how the cost of logistics impact on access to nutritious foods in Ghana? What policies can be proposed to improve access and competitiveness? So that's the question there. I think this, yeah, maybe you can think about that, Phyllis, is just to see how we can respond to that. The information on AGI, I think there's been provided, so I don't need to repeat that one. And then the next question from Maureen Odoi is, what are the funding policies or programs for agribusiness, food sector, private sector, and urban nutrition? Subsidized rates improve on the profitability, capacity utilization, employment, etc., through contract farming among women and youth-led enterprises. So she wants to know the funding policies that are in place. And then there was a comment from Verona. Comments on obesity is not evidence-based. It's based on observation. And yeah, and also a word of caution from Mauli. To be honest, I think we ought to tone down on the correlation between obesity and imported food, as it is not evidence-based, just observational. So it would appear that, yeah, there's probably need for more objective thinking around that one. There's no causality evidence of imported food and obesity. This is Mauli again. And Prof. Hetty Schoenfeld says, a national study on food intake and consumption will provide the evidence on what is driving obesity, not just on observation. So I think that partly answers that point, that yes, this is, we may think it's anecdotal evidence, but we need concrete evidence on that one. So the argument is not about imported food, but ultra-processed food. Not all imported foods are ultra-processed. And if we're calling out high salt and more sugar inputs on foods, then we need to be concerned on the information on labels as well. This is Ramatu, and otherwise we tend not to accept standards. Labels are scientifically generated, guided by standards. So it goes on. Most of these are comments. Are these the imported foods very high with sugar, toffees, biscuits, ice cream, yogurts, etc.? And so a direct question, Phyllis. What do you mean by a capacity building? What exactly are we talking about? Is that training? Okay, so that's those are the range of comments. The last one from Verona says, caution, all of these existed. How about quantity and frequency? We need evidence, not just personal observation. I think that goes back to the obesity issue. So those are the comments that we had on the chat. I think the first one we need to address is on the traditional practices, especially related to intra-household, maybe not just traditional, they're probably still current, intra-household food allocation, men eating all the goodies, and then the boys, and then the girls, and the women in that order. Comment on that, Phyllis?
Yes, so one of the policies I reviewed, the National Nutrition Policy, did make mention of cultural access to food and looking at people's preferences and making sure that you're taking people's behavior and values into account when trying to do nutrition promotion and counseling. So I guess the issue of intra-food allocation was addressed in that sense, that these are contextual and cultural issues you need to take into account when you are talking about food promotion and food utilization. And when I was talking to one of the key informants, I know that one of the development partners is working with the government in SBCC, social behavioral change communication, which I think this would also fall under then, where we are addressing issues related to cultural practices and ideas. So this is also a key thing that I know in terms of programs that the WFP was working with the government to try and look at the social behavior change communication so that it can address some of these things. But the key documents that did talk about this was the National Nutrition Policy.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then there was the issue of when you talk about capacity building, what exactly are you referring to? Are we talking of infrastructure? Is it human capacity building, training? What exactly was covered under the capacity building part of this whole thing with respect to the last, I think it was about stability and sustainability and governance?
So I was looking at human capacity building and institutional capacity building. So looking at some of the objectives and initiatives talking about help teaching people, adding stuff about nutrition into the curriculum, into school curriculums, looking at the ministries being educated on certain M&E frameworks. So these are what we're looking at in terms of like human capacity building related to the implementation and stability. And then also the institutional level. So looking at how best different institutions, because it's also linked into the intersectoral objective of nutrition. So how best can we make sure that institutions have the requisite knowledge, and even in terms of staff, in terms of their staff being trained, so that there's also institutional capacity building, as well as the humans who make up the institution themselves also having the necessary training. So it's basically transfer of knowledge and training.
Okay, thank you. But there was also a question from Maureen on the cost of logistics. I imagine that we're talking transport system, the issue of roads and all these other things. What policies can be proposed to improve access and competitiveness? Did you pick this up in your study? Is this an issue that you can comment on?
So is the question if logistics was an issue?
Well, the question was, did the study identify how the cost of logistics impact on access to nutritious foods in Ghana? And then it extended to ask about what policies could be proposed to improve access and competitiveness.
Yeah, so the cost of logistics, in terms of, like Simba said, if we are talking about post-harvest processing, if we are talking about transport networks, if we are talking about equipment and things like that, yes, that was seen as an issue, as a key challenge. And also policies had talked about trying to improve these road networks and trying to improve processing plants and trying to incentivize private sector to be involved in setting up all these plants and providing technology to try and improve access to nutritious food. So yes, it was identified as a key challenge, and also there were policies which they proposed to try and improve it, and that had a lot to do with incentivize public and private sector collaborations, to incentivize the private sector to be able to help in terms of helping with some of these systems. And the government also proposed, especially with the road networks, to try and help with that to also improve access.
Okay, so obviously that was identified as an issue, the issue of networks, yes, especially in rural areas where it's difficult either to move food to and from those areas, which obviously ends up increasing cost of food and reducing access. There was a question again, I think from Maureen as well, which was talking about funding policies or programs for agribusiness, the private sector, and urban nutrition issues. Are there subsidized rates to improve on profitability? Also covering things like contract farming, were these things that you picked up in any of the policies with these issues addressed?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I can't see the chat, so I can't read it.
So this was about the funding policies or programs for agribusiness or the food sector. This is basically targeting the private sector support.
So in terms of funding, I generally looked at funding for the policy implementation. So I didn't go into the disaggregated funding in terms of how it's being used in the implementation process. So if I looked at a policy, I'd look at what is the funding mechanism which is available for this policy, which most of the time was public, the government providing funds for it, and also with a portion coming from donor budgets, and also some mentioned innovative funding with private sectors. but I don't know if I can fully answer the disaggregated funding sources for the different implementation projects.
Yeah, perhaps I can respond on that one. I'm aware that the agriculture sector investment plan actually has a number of policy implementation instruments that are targeted at the private sector. These are public, this is public investment, which is meant to leverage and encourage the private sector to actually come into business. So they provide things like guarantees, loan guarantees, not 100%, but a certain percentage, where if private sector invests in certain parts of the food systems value chain, they will be able to enjoy either tax breaks, or they can get the banks that finance them can get loan guarantees up to a certain maximum. And this is to reduce the amount of risk that these private companies have to take, especially when dealing with the smallholder sector. And I believe there is also some aggregation schemes. You mentioned contract farming. So the various things that have been proposed here, but the question that I would have wanted to know is to what extent the execution has actually happened. So if you want to see the range of measures that have been put in place in this investment plan, so you can maybe look up that document. This is the Ghana Agriculture Investment Plan, and it has a number of measures that have been put forward. But what I'm not aware of is to what extent this has actually happened on the ground, and to what extent the private sector is actually enjoying some of these benefits. So that's the best I can say on that one. That's the one I'm very much aware of. And I think Ghana is touted as one of those countries that have, in their second generation NIPes, the National Agriculture Investment Plans, that Ghana is one of the leaders in terms of using these policy implementation instruments, where we see policy moving beyond just a statement of intent, but actually saying what government is going to do to invest so that they promote private sector to bring in more resources, because it's the private sector that makes a difference. By private sector, we don't just mean agribusiness. We're also talking about the farmers and anybody else who is not funded from the public sort of purse. Okay, I think we've attended to most of the questions on the chat. There may be some that came through that I have not seen, but we're still open. We have a few more minutes, maybe 5 or so, before we get to the end of our discussion. Actually, there's probably more time, but we can finish earlier if we need to. I think I see another question here from, these are questions that came later on. So it says the claim of unequal intra-household food access is interesting. Phyllis, I would appreciate a link to the National Nutrition Policy document you are referring. Again, similar to the claim of correlation between imported food, it is important that we provide. I think we covered that one. So there's a request here for the National Nutrition Policy document. I don't know if you can provide a link on the chat, Phyllis. And then another question is, did you find any evidence if Ghana's food security policies prioritize innovation, technology to enhance food and nutrition security? Any evidence of institutional collaboration and capacity development at national level? So that's a question there to note. Then I think on the infrastructure logistics one, there was a question, railways. What's the status of the railway system in Ghana? Okay, I think the question on obesity, I think has been reasonably attended to. I'll not take that. I know there's a comment from Ramatu there asking for evidence, but I think we've discussed that one. So Phyllis, any evidence on institutional collaboration, capacity development at national level? And also, I think that's the only one.
Yes, so
then
the policy. Okay. So the policies that prioritize innovation and technology, because it did recognize it, because I looked at the latest version of most of the policies. So something like the Ghana Shared Growth Agenda, that was the second version, the Medium Development Term Policy Framework. Like it's different terms. So I was looking at the earlier version. So sometimes you're able to see the key challenges, which was in the previous versions, and then you see the objectives that they are trying to put in place to try and help with those key challenges. So one of the key challenges was the lack of technology in our agriculture system to enhance food security. So this was noted in the availability sector in terms of the post-harvest management, food processing, all these. They talked about trying to get mechanization of agriculture, talked about the public-private partnerships to set up processing facilities, even the FDA working with processing facilities to make sure that food safety is high up on the list. So this was evident in terms of technology. In terms of institutional collaboration, this was also evident in the sustainability and stability side, where we even had, like I mentioned earlier, they talked about in research a lot. So trying to improve research capacity in the ministries at the subnational level, at the district level, also incorporating education in like about nutrition education into the school curriculum, into vocational curriculums and things like that. So in that sense, there was also capacity development for research and education. And institutional collaboration was also very evident in all of the policies, because even the plan of action, most of the times they listed the implementation agencies, and you could see that it went beyond the Ministry of Agriculture. You had the Ministry of Finance, Planning, Health, like different agencies all being put on the plan of action in terms of implementation agencies. So that was also evident in terms of intersectoral and interministerial collaborations. You are muted.
I don't see any other hands here. I don't know if there are any last sort of comments, any observations anyone would like to make.
I think I could clarify Ramatu's issue, just because I see that it keeps on coming up, the issue of the obesity and the local processed food. So I think the issue, whether it's imported or whether it's local, the issues are food environment is making it easy for access to ultra-processed food. So from a policy point of view, we are trying to say that the food environment should be regulated. So whether in terms of marketing, whether in terms of taxation, health taxes, to try and look at these things, whether regulating the access to children, that is what we are trying to go for, to make sure that the access to these ultra-processed foods is being limited. Because even if it's imported, it's already in country, and you have industries which are producing them in country as well. So the issue here is trying to make sure that we adopt a food systems approach, which then helps us to regulate our food environment, because the link with obesity is definitely the in terms of intake of ultra-processed food. So that has been established. And there is a bit of work which has been done. I think the drivers of food choices is one of them. I know they launched a project recently about healthy foods for healthier diets. So these are things which are happening in Ghana to try and regulate the food environment.
Okay. All right, thank you, Phyllis. Yes, the food environment, I think, is key, because this goes beyond just agriculture, the way we know it, and the agricultural value chain, and everybody seems to associate agriculture with, with our food. But of course, the food systems approach goes well beyond. It's talking to everything that's associated with the production and processing and trade. And you see that there are a lot of other players who are not in agriculture, who are not necessarily nutritionists, but are actually producing, processing, and handling food. And we need to make sure that the whole system speaks with one voice, which is to deliver wholesome and healthy food. And so that's why trade is so important. I think discussions with the trade sector, the Ministry of Trade and Industry, we definitely need to see those discussions taking place, because if with the growth of the supermarket culture, if the bulk of our food is not locally produced, or even if it's produced locally, but it's coming through the supermarket and it's processed, and there's ultra processing. Yes, we know that we can do research, but in a lot of cases we don't need to reinvent the wheel. If you're going to have Ghanaians eating ultra processed food without even doing the research, you can almost know what the implications are going to be down the line. So we can use information from elsewhere, but it's always good to have local research. So it's critical that that we definitely look at all the angles. And I see a note here from Mark Sweden that says, before we close, I believe it is important that we have a clear roundtable communique that profiles specific guidelines for the topics discussed today. So yeah, it's the study itself, we're talking of upwards of plus or minus 40 pages. So it's quite a lot of information, which we try to condense into like 25, 30 minutes of presentation. We appreciate that. But we're going to move on now. I think in terms of that guided communique, I'm going to ask my colleague, Francis Hale, who is Director of Communications and Advocacy at FANAPAN, to kind of try to sum up what we've come up with today and provide that communique, if you like. But as you have noted, we've moved all the way from primary production, looking at how we can have sustainable production systems, taking account of the food quality issues, safety, the issues of markets and trade. We moved over to access, which is both physical and economic. And we looked at utilization, which is really critical, the issues about consumer choices, food choices, and also knowledge on how to prepare and utilize different foods, I think critical. But more, traditionally, the African culture is, being challenged here. The allocation of food at household level, to what extent do we continue to say this is cultural and non-negotiable? But I'm sure we can address that through engagement, with men, whether they're in groups or whatever, groups we can target, to make sure that both at household and community level, these issues are discussed and, there are negative consequences brought to the fore, so we can make a change. And we still have challenges in terms of food governance. Yes, institutionally, I think we've talked about collaboration at institutional level, where we see multi-sectoral collaboration in terms of planning, implementation, and to some extent evaluating and checking on progress. But we don't see a great voice when it comes to the ordinary person out there, the communities, the consumers, to what extent they are also influencing what happens to our food system. So that governance is somewhat at the moment very much top down, very high level, more focusing on regulations and making sure that we adhere to issues of safety and various other regulations. But the question is, when it comes to food preference, what we want to eat, if you look at traditional foods, yes, everybody says they are good for us, but the value chains are not that well developed. And how can we actually see a change? Can policy help there? If we say those traditional foods are good for us, what is government doing to incentivize increased production of those kinds of foods? So these are the issues. Obviously, one study cannot solve all the issues, but we've identified certain gaps, which we hope that will form a basis for future engagement and discussions among the various partners. A pity that we could not get the government colleagues to come on board, because a lot of times these issues end up at their doorstep in terms of what they need to do. I see that Phyllis has posted the link for the National Nutrition Policy. So colleagues, if you can pick that up on the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to invite Francis Hale to come in and give us try and sum up these things and the way forward for us. Francis, are you ready?
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Simba. I'll start with the writer, an apology.
You are breaking. I hope your connectivity will improve.
Developed a lot with the advent of that's the opening that I am actually giving. My technology has not been to its best today. I've been on and off the platform, but managed to follow largely what was happening. I will not say much, but state that I believe the study, the way it has been done, the way it was structured, the methodology is adequate. It's sufficient. It has managed to trigger dialogue. It has managed to trigger the debate that I see would continue if the facilitator allows it to continue. And the issues that are coming out show that this is a good starting point for a conversation that gives us a basis for planning going into the future. Am I audible? On my end, it's saying I'm not.
You're okay.
Okay, thank you. There is need for more work to be done to refine the gaps that have been identified and the gaps in the study that are being identified now. So from a CaBFood sort of perspective, I think it's important to acknowledge that what has been presented is not whole. Even in Phyllis' presentation, there are some things that she couldn't get. Those gaps need to be filled in so that our understanding of the challenges, understanding of the status of food and nutrition security in Ghana improves. I think based on that, without going and reciting again the recommendations that were given for policy and the recommendations that were given for research, I would look at next steps that looks at what does this mean? What do we develop out of this insight, out of the knowledge that we've gained here? We were supposed to have government. We didn't get government. And this is not unique in Uganda. For a network such as ours, this is something that we experience in many countries. And it's a sign of how things work. Inclusive, multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral approaches are required if the next steps is going to work. For instance, you'd like a non-state actor engagement where the importance of this is shared and we value it all at the same time. I would not know why the government is not there. For various reasons, things happen, but going forward as the next steps, government, the state actor, the non-state actor, the private sector, which is here, would need to come together and ensure that there is a common understanding, and then the projecting of a way forward is all-inclusive. I believe that there are interventions that we see out of here, and I used my model in Fanapan, where we are looking at policy and influencing policy, we are looking at capacity strengthening, and we are looking at advocacy and knowledge. For policy influencing, immediately, there are issues that exist in the policy, in the policies that were analyzed, like incentives for production, for the production of nutrition food or nutritious foods. Those policies need to be implemented, and we improve production. So there are things that are requiring us to go and enforce implementation. We are not going to start coming up with a policy to incentivize production. There are things where we need to start afresh. Maybe there might be no budget line, say, for nutrition in the budget. That might be something that we need to start. If you look at capacity strengthening, there is a need to build everyone's knowledge to move and migrate from food security, which has been what we know, to food and nutrition security. And the issue of behavior change, which was mentioned, needs to operate from the lowest level, household level, individual level, up to government level, so that in our planning, in our budgets, in everything, the food and nutrition component is then carried through. I also picked the issue of monitoring and evaluation frameworks. What's measured gets done. And the explicitity of food security, food and nutrition security, and nutrition indicators is very important. Going forward, we can plan and put those in our national agriculture investment plans, in our food and nutrition and security strategies. For as long as we do not have a measurement mechanism, we are not going to improve. And that is something that I picked, and I felt that it's very important. The mainstreaming of nutrition in curricula, in schools, in operating institutions. We look at our CSOs as an intermediary. Their understanding of nutrition and how they impart it, and government departments and how they impart has to be standardized, and it has to be mainstreamed. And then the last thing that I picked, I will hand over to my colleague. I do believe you will buttress what I am saying, is the implementation, policy enforcement. For those policies that are already there, there is need for policy enforcement. I spoke about behavior change at all levels, and then there is a need to improve infrastructure to influence access, competitiveness, and the issues that were now being raised of a large-scale infrastructure like railways in the country. I do believe that this is a starting point. It is a study which should not go on a shelf, but should inform interventions, should form actual interventions where government says we are now moving to implement this. The gaps that were given in the 4 charts for availability, for access, for utilization, and the sustainability of supply, those gaps point us to areas where we can do proper programming to address those gaps. Thank you. I will hand over to Simba, and I apologize for the platform. Simba, if you can buttress, I know it wasn't just the facilitator. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. I think Hello,
Simba.
Yes, I can hear you. I think he probably can't pick me up. His network has gotten much worse. But thank you, colleagues. I think we sort of like, we still have a few more minutes, but otherwise that was the way forward, which the way I'm seeing it is that we use this study as, as an entry point, as it were. It's identified some gaps, but of course, there is also a recommendation for further, research, which I believe, especially with our partners from, the various universities here, this calls for, more areas of research. I think the obesity issue was raised, and so this will probably form an interesting project for some graduate, program. So let's see how we proceed from here. And this is an installment to say, look, it's one thing to have these policies, but it's another thing to make sure that the policies are implemented and we assess our progress. But I think for me, one of the major critical areas is the issue of funding. It's always been a major issue. So we need to see how we can do some advocacy, especially from the non-state actors and also within government, to make sure that the ministries of finance, treasury, which is where the budgets come from, that they do understand the implications and the cost, the real cost, economic costs of malnutrition. I know that there have been cost of hunger studies conducted in various countries, but some of these are not necessarily sort of brought to the attention of the people that matter, so that they can see the implications of, it's not just about nutrition. Nutrition is really about the whole economy, because there's a much bigger cost to the whole economy that comes with malnutrition and underdevelopment of human talent because of poor nutrition. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank all our presenters this morning. And yeah, Phyllis, especially for conducting the study and sharing the results of the study. Thanks to Prof. Hetty for sharing on the overview of the CaBFood program and you know, the great partnership that Arua is leading. We also want to thank our colleagues at the University of Ghana, Professor Irene, for helping us to reach out to, you know, all the stakeholders in Ghana, and my colleagues at FANAPAN for all the, you know, backroom preparations. And Prof. Osafo, I see you've been online, you've been attentive. Unfortunately, the internet let us down. I did most of your work, so I'll be sending you an invoice for that. But otherwise, thank you very much for the collaboration. We hope that this is the beginning of, you know, more engagements. And as FANAPAN, we itching to come and set up some presence in Ghana so that we could further these, you know, food systems and make sure that we have a feel of what's happening on the ground. Otherwise, colleagues, I would like to thank you so much. And as we said, this study was conducted in 3 countries. Next week, on the 13th of July, we're having a similar event for South Africa. And we hope that most of you will be able to make it to that meeting. I would like to say thank you and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you.